Hey guys, it's YOU WACK, and recently I've been making a lot of videos talking about buffing some heroes and even nerfing some heroes. Like in my latest video, I talked about buffing Reinhardt, and in that video in particular, it seemed like a lot of people were really fond of the idea about buffing Reinhardt, more or less just nerfing the dive comp, because it seems like a lot of people aren't really liking the current meta right now in Season 5, myself included. Maybe it's just because I suck this season. We all have our off seasons, but that's why I make these videos about buffing heroes or even nerfing heroes, because I bring to the table an idea that could just bring up some heroes to try to compete with the current meta. Now, this is probably going to be my last video about talking about a nerf to something, because, well, Doomfist is going to be coming up, and then soon enough, the Summer Games event is going to be coming out, but I do want to get your guys' thoughts on the current dive meta, if you guys do think it deserves a nerf. But also, I do want you guys to pay attention to the gameplay that you're watching right here, because at the beginning of the gameplay, we did have a Winston, and we had a pretty cookie-cut dive comp meta. We had a Lucio, we had Winston. Those are pretty much the two required heroes when it comes to the dive comp. The rest is very flexible, and that's my biggest problem when it comes to trying to nerf pretty much a strats, because, well, the dive comp, if you want to try to nerf the strats, really you have to look at Winston and Lucio, because the rest is all flexible. I don't know what the Winston did change to, because, well, you see right here that the Winston didn't really work out because they had a Reaper on the other team. I think he either switched to a Diva or a Zarya. I'm pretty sure it was a Diva, but at that time in particular, it just shows that, well, our team, just as us as players, really don't formulate to the dive comp that well, and also they had huge counters. But that doesn't stray away from the fact that the dive comp is probably the best strat that you can try to run in Season 5, and even the pros are using the whole entire dive comp. People are running solo tank with just Winston. In fact, I even saw data somewhere, I don't know really where, but it showed that Winston, I think, was the #1 picked hero in all of Season 5, and rightfully so, because he got just a little tiny buff to him that made him just thrown into the meta, whereas beforehand, Winston was kind of the worst hero back in Season 3. He would always run a Roadhog, a Reinhardt, a Diva, a Zarya. Who was the, oh, that's right, Winston, because this was also before Orisa came out. So really, that just goes to show that just buffing heroes can compete and change the whole entire meta. That's why I talk about just buffing things, because I always try to make heroes better. But going back to the topic about nerfing the whole entire dive comp, if we even want to just talk about the whole strat in general, there's a few things that I think can come with as terms of a nerf to try to make this strategy a little less effective, is what I'm trying to say. But before we can even talk about nerfing the dive comp, we have to look at the heroes as a whole that makes up this strat. So pretty much the Winston and Lucio, like I mentioned before, are pretty much required. There's no doubt about it. This is what makes the dive comp, but the rest is very flexible. Some say you need to run a Diva, some say you need to run a Zarya. I always say you should run the Zarya because, well, it gives that Winston that's having the added bubble protection, and for the healers, maybe you can run a Zenyatta, or maybe you can even run a Mercy, because, well, you can throw the orb on the Winston, or Mercy is just a great healer overall. And then the DPS spot, this is really flexible because you can run a Genji, you can run a Tracer, both are great heroes right now, or maybe even a Pharah or just a Soldier. There's so many spots. This is why it's so hard to nerf the dive comp. Whenever I hear comments or just arguments saying, oh yeah, the dive comp is so overpowered, we need to nerf it, and I ask them, it's like, okay, what should we nerf it? I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm kind of agreeing with you, but what part of the dive comp needs to be nerfed? And that is what's the hardest part when it comes to something like this, because if you want to remember back in Season 3, Winston was kind of like the worst tank that you can use, but he got a little tiny buff, and this is just an example in why I make so many buff videos, because, well, heroes need to hang with the current meta to change the meta. From that little buff where Winston's bubble cooldown was added, whereas beforehand, once it was destroyed, then the cooldown started, that just made Winston a much more viable hero. You still had to be smart with him, you couldn't just dive in like you saw in this video, but really, it made him a better hero. And then with Lucio, it's kind of like a toss-up. I love the new Lucio compared to the older one, because you're doing a little bit more, but maybe some people are going to suggest, well, maybe make Lucio's speed song a little less slower. When you speed people up, it shouldn't be that fast, or maybe slow down his heal song. This is where it gets really antsy, and why I don't think a nerf will really come into play, because, well, what do you want to do with Winston? Do you want to bring that old bubble cooldown back when it gets destroyed, then the cooldown starts? No. Then Lucio, like I mentioned before, there's just those two heroes, really, I don't think are going to get nerfed when it comes to nerfing the dive comp. But another thing you also have to remember is that there's two important factors that are coming out to try to compete with the dive comp. The first thing is Zarya's ultimate buff. So as you guys know, when you get caught in the graviton, you're not going to be able to use any movement abilities like Tracer's blink ability, or Genji's dash ability, or Mercy's fly ability, or in Winston's jump ability, which those are 4 heroes that are most commonly seen in the dive comp. So that's going to compete and help with the current meta right now, and that's an example of where buffing heroes will just help try to combat the current meta. I mean, we saw that with Winston. A buff came, completely changed the world of tank meta. And with Ryan, I'm sure he's going to get a buff. With Roadhog, he's most likely going to give it a buff. I'm sure that's a big factor of why the dive comp is being so prevalent, because, well, he's not able just to hook the people that are out of position. But one last thing a lot of people have to remember of what's going to make the dive comp even more effective on the opposite side of the spectrum is Doomfist. So Doomfist is all about diving, man. He's just uppercutting things. He's just literally diving in with his Doomfist, and also his ultimate ability literally can go in the back line and just nuke the Mercy, nuke the Zenyatta, and it's just all about diving. So, and it can also go past the Ryan shield, which just makes the Ryan shield even more useless. So I don't know what's gonna happen. All I know is that changes are gonna need to be made if we want to see a different meta, because if no changes are made, then we're always gonna have the dive comp. And what I mean by change is either a nerf or a buff to certain type of heroes, most likely a buff, because we saw Winston buff that made him more viable. What are we gonna do? Nerf Winston? No, because he doesn't need a nerf. He's a great hero, but you need to be smart with him. But maybe I'm wrong. I want to hear you guys' thoughts. Do you think maybe Tracer's blink ability needs to be slowed down a little bit when it comes to the cooldown, or do you think Lucio's song needs to be slowed down? I don't know. That's where you guys come in. Usually with these nerfs and buffs videos, I give ideas to nerf something, but really you can't nerf a strat because there's different components of this that makes it so viable. But I don't know. Maybe you guys have different thoughts. So I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm sure the Zarya buff is going to come into play and really change how we play this dive comp. So love you guys. Thank you guys for watching more Overwatch videos to come, and bye.